Pre-dawn, 30 April 1943, a Royal Navy submarine idles off Huelva on Spain's Atlantic coast. A sealed steel canister is opened, a life belt fixed, and a chain dispatch case secured to a Royal Marines officer's uniform. Within minutes, the tide takes the body toward shore. The operation name on British paperwork is Mincemeat. The boat is HMS Seraph, an S-class submarine detailed to special duties and commanded by Lieutenant Norman Jewell, Royal Navy. She had sailed from the Clyde after a quiet loading at Holy Loch, the canister marked as optical instruments and packed with dry ice to keep its contents preserved and scentless. The crew list is routine, the deck party small. The time chosen matches tide tables plotted to carry a floating body toward beaches near Punta Umbria, within reach of Spanish civil authority and, through them, German intelligence. The corpse wears the identity the British built. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Standard battle dress sits over a Mi West lifebelt. Identity discs and service papers are correct to the letter. Around the waist, a length of chain secures a leather-handled briefcase bearing the brass initials of a staff officer. Inside that case, envelopes on high-level stationary sketch a Mediterranean future where Greece and Sardinia matter most and Sicily is a distraction. In his pockets are the untidy proofs of an ordinary life, the kind that persuades coroners and diplomats that a man is exactly who his cards say he is. Opening the canister releases a cloud of carbon dioxide vapor in the Atlantic air. The men work quickly. Condensation on cloth turns to wet in seconds. The chain is checked once more. The straps of the lifebelt are cinched. The release point lies roughly a mile offshore, far enough to encourage a drift, close enough to be found by morning. The submarine's bridge notes bearings, a habit born of navigation and here, of record-keeping for an operation that will be reconstructed on paper long after everyone present has rotated to other patrols. Huelva is not accidental. Spanish neutrality there is threaded with legal forms that move efficiently from beach to courthouse to ministry. German officers are known to collect what the tide offers. British consular staff in the city are primed to inquire after the deceased and request the return of official effects in the correct tone. Respectful, insistent, never urgent enough to frighten the chain of custody. The plan requires physics, paperwork, and habit to do most of the work. Accounts differ on the words spoken on Seraph's casing. The log is terse and the hour is cold. What is not in dispute is the sequence. The body enters the water, the bright cork of the lifebelt keeping face and chest up, the briefcase half submerged and obvious. The submarine clears the area without signaling, submerging to continue her passage. Behind her, an object rides the slow Atlantic swell toward a shoreline where fishermen launch, Guardia officers patrol, and a vice-consul will read a death certificate that fits the story built in London. By 4:30 the action is complete. The decision now transferred to currents and to offices ashore. The man who was Glyndwr Michael moves toward his second identity and a second, larger purpose. Within hours, a Spanish autopsy will record drowning, a cemetery will receive a British major, and a leather case will begin a journey through desks whose contents shape campaigns. The quiet mechanics of deception are in motion. Allied planners had selected Sicily as the stepping stone into Europe, Operation Husky, set for July 1943. German analysts considered Sicily the obvious target, so a credible misdirection was mandatory. The cover plan, Operation Barclay, aimed to threaten the Balkans and Sardinia loudly enough to pull Axis reserves away. Mincemeat was built to make that threat feel real. Sicily's geography dictated the problem. From Tunis to Marsala is barely 100 nautical miles, well inside Allied fighter range, ideal for convoy cover, and close to existing supply pipelines running east from El Alamein. It also sat astride Axis shipping lanes from Naples to Tripoli, meaning that capturing it promised immediate pressure on Italian morale and a springboard toward the mainland. The island's suitability was so self-evident that any German staff officer tracing fuel arcs on a map would flag it first. Deception, therefore, had to create an alternative scenario that was not merely possible but urgent. Operation Barclay provided the scaffolding. Radio traffic from notional 12th Army headquarters in Cairo began to pulse with references to Greek ports, river crossings on the Vardar, and engineering stores appropriate for Balkan mountain warfare. In the eastern Mediterranean, real reconnaissance flights over Crete and the Dodecanese intensified, generating German reports of Allied interest. Alexandria dock manifests intentionally displayed roll-on pontoons and specialist vehicles marked for marshland operations, hinting at an amphibious assault on the Peloponnese. Meanwhile, RAF squadrons staged mock fighter sweeps over the Gulf of Taranto, easy for Luftwaffe observers to tally. What Barclay lacked was a single piece of evidence dramatic enough to crystallize these signals into certainty. Intelligence intercepts showed that Berlin distrusted double agents unless physical proof corroborated them. Thus emerged the requirement for a courier who could plausibly die and leave behind documents no Abwehr colonel would dismiss. The courier would steer attention toward Greece, reinforce the peripheral Sardinian threat, and downplay Sicily as a diversionary feint. The stakes were quantified in divisions. Feldmarschall Kesselring could, on short notice, divert 14th Panzer Corps units from Calabria across the Messina Strait. Luftflotte II could reposition Ju-88 bomber wings from southern France in under 48 hours. Every battalion tied to Greece or Sardinia by false orders represented fewer anti-tank guns on Sicily's beaches when the real convoys appeared. In a war measured in tons and hours, the margin of deception would be carved out of train timetables, fuel allocations, and the psychological comfort of commanders who believed they had guessed correctly. Mincemeat was designed to deliver that comfort, just long enough. The concept echoed an idea circulating in British naval intelligence since 1939, often associated with the so-called Trout Memo. The suggestion was simple: plant deceptive documents on a corpse likely to fall into enemy hands. In early 1943, MI5 officer Charles Comandelli and Naval Intelligence's Ewan Montagu shaped it into an executable plan. Approval moved quietly through London offices used to irregular warfare. What turned a passing notion into procedure was timing. By January 1943, the Joint Planning Staff needed a decisive addition to Operation Barclay. Mediterranean deception traffic was abundant but lacked a single gold bar that enemy analysts could not ignore. Comandelli, serving as secretary to the Double Cross Committee, retrieved the Trout Memo from departmental files, annotated it with lessons from recent German document recovery incidents in North Africa, and presented the outline at a committee session on 28 January. Montagu, a barrister by training and in uniform as Lieutenant Commander, Special Branch, recognized that legal and forensic hurdles, identification, cause of death, custody, would define feasibility as much as tradecraft. Layered approvals followed a route mapped in initials rather than fanfare. First, MI5's director, Sir David Petrie, endorsed the operational principle. Next, Rear Admiral John Godfrey of Naval Intelligence secured Admiralty concurrence. The operation, codenamed Mincemeat and subsumed under the wider Plan Barclay, then moved to the 20 Committee XX for integration with existing double-agent traffic, ensuring that when false papers surfaced, controlled agents would corroborate them. On 18 February, the Chiefs of Staff Committee logged a brief confirming minute. Resources authorized, subject to medical and diplomatic safeguards. The medical safeguard hinged on Sir Bentley Purchas, London's senior coroner. Records show a discreet conference in his chambers during the second week of February, where Montagu and a pathologist assessed storage requirements, autopsy timelines, and legal implications of using an unclaimed body. Purchas agreed to cooperate provided burial would follow with military honors and anonymity preserved under wartime secrecy acts. Ministry of Health officials subsequently arranged a refrigerated facility beneath St. Pancras Coroner's Court that could maintain the cadaver at approximately 4 degrees C pending transfer. Parallel to the medical chain, Montagu drafted Memorandum QE16, listing operational risks, Spanish autopsy protocols, potential German forensic scrutiny, and diplomatic backlash if exposure occurred. Each risk carried mitigation notes, dry ice transport, realistic personal effects, rapid consular intervention. By early March, the memo's circulation list included the Deputy Director of Military Intelligence and selected Foreign Office legal advisors. None objected. Marginalia in pencil read simply, "High gain outweighs hazard." With sign-offs in place, the plan moved from file to workshop. Naval Supply issued a battle dress in Royal Marines rank. MI5 clerks sourced ticket stubs and club receipts. Montagu's secretary typed personal letters on genuine Admiralty stationery. The macabre idea had crossed the threshold from hypothetical to scheduled tasking, its success now a matter of craft, weather, and the inevitable scrutiny of an enemy already searching for Allied intentions. A Welshman named Glyndwr Michael died in London in January 1943. The official cause involved ingesting rat poison. With the coroner's authorization, his body was made available to the operation. The exact family permissions are unclear in surviving files. The body's condition suited a narrative of death at sea. In official paperwork that followed, his real name did not appear. Post-mortem notes held at St. Pancras Coroner's Court describe pulmonary congestion and minimal external trauma, findings that could pass as immersion hypoxia if seawater reached the lungs after an aircraft ditching. The rat poison, believed to be zinc phosphide scraped from bait, produced gastric irritation but left no conspicuous lesions once embalming chemicals entered the tissue. Pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury, consulted informally, confirmed that after several months in cold storage, the microscopic evidence would blur further, eliminating most risk that a Spanish medical officer might flag inconsistencies during a brief civil service autopsy. Temperature control became the decisive variable. On 4 February, the body was transferred to a refrigerated room below the coroner's chambers and logged under a numeric code. Thermographs pinned to the door show an average of 4 degrees C, adequate to retard decomposition without visible frost damage that could raise suspicion. Preparation for a sea narrative involved meticulous staging. Naval tailors altered a size medium battle dress to match Royal Marines pattern 1940. Rank badges of acting major were hand-stitched with new thread, leaving no backrooms where lines that an alert investigator could question. A Mi West life preserver, deflated, was fitted but not armed with Code 2, consistent with an airman who failed to trigger it in time. Photographs taken by MI5 camera section document posture and limb flexibility tests to ensure that rigor had resolved before embarkation. Any stiffness on a beach would have looked unnatural. For transport, the Admiralty Engineering Branch fabricated a sealed steel cylinder 6 ft6 in long, 26 in diameter, lined with zinc to resist dry ice acidification. Loading records from Holy Loch list 180 lb of solid Co2 packed around the stretcher, calculated to maintain interior temperatures near 15 degrees C for the 40-hour rail and road journey and the 4-day submarine passage. Ethical considerations were logged rather than debated. A memorandum initialed by Bentley Purchase stipulated a full military funeral once the ruse ended, and eventually notification to next of kin, if traceable. War Cabinet minutes from 23 March note that the use of an unidentified body was regrettable but operationally justified, a phrase underlined in red pencil. Thus Glyndwr Michael, a man who slipped unnoticed through London's margins, became Major William Martin, the linchpin of an operation designed to reshape a continent's frontline. The team created an identity. Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, a staff officer with combined operations. This persona received a carefully layered life history consistent with Britain's officer class, including an address, clubs, and duties. The goal was not just a name tag but a believable man whose pockets told a story. Every item would support the same arc. A staff courier lost in an air crash at sea. Work began in a windowless room 2 floors beneath the Admiralty, where MI5 clerks spread sample pocket litter across a baize-topped table. Reference files from actual Marine officers supplied template details. Paybook sequence numbers, clandestine inoculation entries, the correct rubber stamp ink for embarkation clearances through HMS Vernon. From that corpus, they built Martin's service record, born 1907, commissioned 1930, promoted acting major November 1942 after deep planning duty, dates that dovetailed with combined operations headquarters rosters held in confidential lists. Identity documents came next. A national registration card, Series RYK 639,058, was laboriously aged. Lamination peeled back, surface repolished with talc, corners blunted against a stone stair to mimic years of wallet friction. An Admiralty shore leave pass carried an expiry of 1 May 1943, sealing Martin's final journey inside a realistic timeline. Payroll chits showed 1 fortnight's subsistence allowance uncollected, a detail chosen to imply a man too busy to visit the cashier before boarding the doomed aircraft. Personal life was woven with equal care. Intelligence Secretary Jean Leslie provided a snapshot of herself in summer dress. On the reverse, the scrawled words "Till soon, love Pam." The ink was water-tested to ensure it would not run if immersed. A jeweler in Burlington Arcade issued a receipt for an engagement ring deposit of £53 10s, stamped 16 April. Fold lines on the slip replicated casual pocketing. A letter from Lloyd's Bank at Cornhill warned that the major's account was £17 overdrawn. A humanizing flaw unlikely to interest counterintelligence, yet solid in its mundanity. To reinforce the staff courier role, a theater ticket stub from the Prince of Wales's most recent review was added, time-coded to the night before an early morning de Havilland flight from RAF Hendon to Gibraltar. Combined operations typed a memorandum granting Martin, blacklist, clearance to read operation schedules without needing a sign-in, vital if the abuyer questioned why sensitive papers rode with a single officer. Finally, a finish of disorder. 4 loose keys on a fob, a used pack of gold flake cigarettes -2 sticks, sand in a trouser hem from a deliberate stroll along the Thames foreshore. When the items were laid inside the battle dress pockets and photographed for the master file, they formed a life instantly legible to any coastal gendarme or German analyst. A competent, slightly hurried officer, engaged to be married, juggling bills, entrusted with papers too urgent to entrust to codified cable. Major William Martin was ready to die. The pockets carried the detritus of life. Used ticket stubs, a bill from a naval tailor, a bank notice about an overdraft, and a snapshot of a smiling young woman nicknamed Pam. MI5 staff assembled the set from genuine period items, including letters composed to sound personal, unguarded, and recent. None of this referenced military plans. It simply made Martin real. The detail density was deliberate. Each object was measured against 2 yardsticks, authentic wear and narrative fit. The ticket stubs came from the 24 March matinee of Niall Coward's Present Laughter at the Haymarket. The theatre's perforation marks matched those found in litter collected off actual London pavements. The naval tailor's bill originated from Jeeves, number 21 Old Bond Street, for 1 mess jacket altered to SB waist. Clerks lightly crumpled and then flattened the paper, giving it the texture of a receipt folded and refolded for weeks. The overdraft notice, printed on Lloyd's Bank watermarked stock, listed a negative balance of £17 and 4 shillings, mirroring pre-payday anxieties common among officers posted away from home. Pam's photograph became the emotional anchor. Jean Leslie's image was contact-printed in 3 copies, one for the pocket, one for headquarters reference, and one retained as evidence should controversy arise after the operation. A lipstick kiss, pressed to the emulsion and then dabbed to prevent smearing, provided forensic noise. Fibers of cotton handkerchief left faint red traces, the sort an analyst might find under magnification and write off as accidental. The reverse carried a short message ending with the hopeful promise, "All my love." Linguists at Bletchley reviewed the syntax, ensuring neither class markers nor regional spellings contradicted Martin's supposed upbringing in St. John's Wood. The disposable minutiae went further. A book of matches from the Naval and Military Club bore 2 sticks missing and a faint burn on the striker strip. Wool fibers on the coat lining were seeded with traces of dog hair sourced from an Admiralty Messenger's spaniel. Kennel records show many Marine officers kept pets when ashore, a detail small but statistically consistent. Mi-5 chemists dusted the wallet interior with minute flecks of pipe tobacco to suggest shared habits with colleagues on late-night shifts. By the time the battle dress lay zipped inside its cold cylinder, every crease, scent, and smudge had been reverse-engineered. Should a pathologist thumb through the wallet or a German Abwehr officer catalog its contents, the impression had to be instant. This is not evidence. This is a man. Inside the chain briefcase were carefully crafted high-level letters. One, bearing the signature of the British Army's Vice Chief, discussed forthcoming operations in terms that highlighted Greece and Sardinia and downplayed Sicily. Another, from Combined Operations Leadership to the Mediterranean Naval Command, reinforced the same picture. Exact phrasing varies by source, but the intent is clear. Steer German analysis away from Sicily. Authenticity began with stationery. The Vice Chief's note was typed on embossed War Office paper cut from the same ream used for genuine directives that week. Watermark orientation and rag cotton fiber count matched laboratory samples retained by Mi-5. The Combined Operations letter rode Admiralty blue tint stock, sourced directly from the duplicating room at Norfolk House. Clerks duplicated the correct registry numbers, marginal penciled initials, and smudged docket stamps, details likely invisible to the casual reader, yet instantly validating to an Abwehr document specialist familiar with British filing conventions. Content balanced precision with plausible vagueness. Paragraphs referenced Operation Brimstone and Operation Husky, in a manner suggesting Brimstone, code for Sardinia, required the bulk of amphibious lift, while Husky, framed parenthetically, appeared as a diversionary threat useful for pinning Axis air units within Sicily. Lists of landing craft and stores mirrored real quartermaster tallies for the Aegean deception, ensuring that any cross-checking of signals, traffic, or shipping reconnaissance would align. Handwritten marginalia, single-word confirmations in green chinograph, added the feel of working staff papers caught mid-journey. Security theater was integral. The letters were folded along lines consistent with repeated handling, then slid into hand-addressed envelopes sealed with the personal red wax of Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye. A strand of coarse hair from a naval messenger was embedded deliberately in the wax, a primitive tamper indicator that British intelligence later used to confirm Spanish interference. To support that forensics game, micro-photographs of each crease and fiber were archived in London. Any change detected upon the case's return would certify the papers had been read. Anchor items complemented the letters. An Admiralty cipher table of outdated edition, authentic but safe to lose, and a visiting card packet containing 2 used, 1 blank. All were nested within a buff folder marked Most Secret and clipped with a rust-flecked bulldog clip appropriate to field circulation. Should Madrid's censors or Berlin's analysts weigh the package, they would find that its physical heft, its bureaucratic flourishes, and its tightly framed urgency all pointed to the same conclusion. Major Allied commitments aimed east of Sicily. Time and temperature were the enemy. A custom steel canister, charged with dry ice, preserved the remains for transit and masked any smell under the label of optical instruments. Cold store intervals were planned against a submarine sailing schedule from the Clyde. The chain of custody was recorded with the precision of a medical trial. The container measured 78 in by 26 in, fabricated from 14-gauge mild steel and internally clad with a 1/8 in zinc liner to slow corrosion from carbon dioxide condensate. Admiralty draftsmen borrowed the dimensions from an RAF Mosquito drop tank, adding 4 pad eyes so dockside cranes could lift it horizontally, minimizing slosh of melted ice inside. The screwcap hatch, 8 inches across, seated on a rubber gasket scavenged from a corroded fleet air arm depth charge. One full turn of a spanner sealed the vessel to a pressure tolerance of 10 psi, enough to prevent deck watchkeepers from smelling formalin even in a dead calm. Dry ice loading followed a strict curve. 180 lb packed around the stretcher at 78 degrees C, calculated to maintain an interior mean of 15 degrees C for 96 hours. A Royal Army Medical Corps officer logged core temperature readings with a thermocouple probe at 12-hour intervals until handover. His clipboard survives in National Archives file ADM 223-214, each entry initialed, each variance no greater than 0.4 degrees C. When readings climbed above 10 degrees C on the third night, extra pellets were tamped in through a funnel, a procedure rehearsed to avoid frostbite burns that could tear gloves and leave fibers on the corpse. Transit from London to Holy Loch resembled a relay more than a journey. At 2200 on 17 April, the canister left St. Pancras Mortuary in a War Office Bedford 30 CWT lorry and entered the Midland Rail Yard under convoy escort. Goods train 5M57 hauled it north at an average 42 mph, stopping only to replenish dry ice at Crewe and Carlisle. Railway documentation lists the cargo as cylindrical equipment, sensitive, handle upright. At Gourock, the cylinder transferred onto a flatbed trailer and crossed the Holy Loch pierhead, tagged into HMS Seraph Special Stores manifest as item S1-109, optical instruments, weight 408 lb. Throughout, a tan ledger encoded each custody change: time, location, signatures, temperature reading, quantity of residual dry ice. 83 entries fill 6 pages. The last, time 2307 on 19 April, records the skipper's initials and a brief notation: stowed forward of torpedo hatch, C fastened. In a war fought with divisions and fleets, the survival of a single body for 9 more days depended on steel thickness, insulation, and clerks who understood that every decimal mattered. Spain was neutral but porous. Huelva had onshore currents, a cooperative Spanish bureaucracy, and a known German intelligence presence that often received sensitive material. British diplomats in the city, notably the vice-consul, were prepared to play their roles in the ensuing paperwork. Geography and human networks converged on that beach. Hydrographic charts compiled by the Admiralty's Surveying Service show a gentle counterclockwise eddy in the Gulf of Cadiz. Objects released a mile seaward of Punta Umbria drift northeast and ground out on the sandbars that fringe the Rio Odile estuary. Average surface current in late April registers 0.6 knots, high enough to move a buoyant body 3 cables per hour, slow enough to leave tide line debris intact. Tidal tables for 30 April 1943 list high water at 5:37 local, perfect for a pre-dawn release that would strand the body during ebb. When fishermen launch small craft and Guardia Civil patrols begin their first shoreline sweep, intelligence files at the Foreign Office map the human terrain just as thoroughly. Huelva's copper-smelting industry had drawn German commercial agents before the war. By 1943, a Buyer station, Alaric, maintained at least 3 officers there under commercial cover. The best documented is Oberleutnant Adolf Kloss, an engineer whose regular routine included shoreline walks, supposedly, to inspect ore-loading jetties. Ultra-intercepts from February-March 1943 show Kloss forwarding reports of Allied aircraft wreckage washed ashore, evidence that local authorities passed flotsam quickly into German hands. Spanish officialdom provided the hinge. Provincial Subdelegate of Maritime Affairs, Captain Fernando Gómez Reino, followed a protocol that required any foreign military remains to be reported to the Ministry of Marine in Madrid. Madrid, in turn, directed copies to the German naval attaché, Captain zur See Karl-Erich Kuhlenthal, a conduit Admiral Canaris relied on for frontline intelligence. The chain habitually took 48-72 hours, long enough for documents to be photographed and evaluated before diplomatic return. On the British side, Vice-Consul Francis Haselden lived 6 streets from the beach road. His orders, drafted by Section XVII at the Foreign Office, instructed him to appear dutifully surprised, press gently for the briefcase's return, and insist that personal effects accompany the body to burial. Any hint of haste was forbidden. The goal was to let Spanish-German curiosity bloom while preserving plausible British concern for a fallen officer. Thus, the choice of Huelva fused physics with paperwork. Currents would deliver the corpse, local law would seize it, German operatives would sniff opportunity, and a British official, positioned but not pushing, would lend the spectacle the ring of bureaucratic normalcy. The beach itself, flat, bleached sand bordered by low pines, promised no obstacles to a quick find. In deception planning, certainty is rare. At Huelva in 1943, it was calculated to within a knot of tide and a habit of filing forms. The submarine chosen was HMS Seraph, a P-class boat with a crew used to special operations. On 30 April, the body was eased into the water about a mile off the coast. Watch officers noted tide, wind, and bearings. The dispatch case was secured with a chain to make discovery plausible. The submarine cleared the area before dawn. Seraph carried the hull number P219 and displaced 1290 tons submerged. Since 1942, she had landed SOE teams in Algeria and extracted free French officers from Corsica, experience that bred a precise choreography on the casing. Lieutenant Norman Jewell, her 31-year-old commanding officer, scheduled the release for 4:30 local, 1 hour before civil twilight, to exploit a sliver of moon and a falling tide. Engine room logs show both diesels shut down at 4:12. The boat rode on batteries to minimize exhaust haze against the pale horizon. 2 petty officers manhandled the steel cylinder from the forward casing hatch, assisted by a block-end tackle lashed to the gun mounting. At 4:17, the hatch cap turned free, venting a plume of carbon dioxide vapor that drifted like stage smoke across the conning tower rim. Crewmen wore wool-watch gloves to avoid skin-freeze burns. A medical orderly checked core temperature, still below 4 degrees C. The corpse, in Royal Marines battle dress, was transferred to a canvas stretcher rigged with slip lines, so the body could slide silently into the sea without a splash audible beyond 50 yards. Weather data entered in the bridge notebook records sea state 2, wind southwest at 6 knots, barometer steady at 10-15 millibars. Bearings to Punta Umbria Lighthouse and a secondary reference on Isla Salts were scribbled alongside. 067 degrees and 091 degrees. Navigators later typed these figures into the Admiralty's post-action memorandum, proof that the release matched the drift model calculated in London. The briefcase, leather, brass-trimmed, was double-looped in half-inch shipwright's chain, its weight chosen so it rode just below surface but stayed visible. Sailors secured the chain to the belt of the Me West life preserver, then tested buoyancy by lowering the package over the side on a heaving line. It floated chest-high, exactly as designed. At 4:28, the heaving line was severed with a bosun's knife, leaving Major William Martin to the current. Seraph submerged at 4:35, trimming down to 90 ft while the first gray wash of dawn touched the Atlantic. In the control room, the navigator marked time to clear on a grease board, 6 minutes on battery before restoring diesel drive. By 4:41, the boat was southwestbound at 8 knots, invisible beneath a thermocline. Behind her, a lone figure in khaki drifted shoreward, pulling with it a story calculated to redirect divisions hundreds of miles away. Local accounts record that a body in a life belt washed ashore near Huelva that morning. Spanish authorities took custody, and the British vice-consul initiated formalities for a deceased officer, pressing for the return of the case as next of kin property. The case did not return immediately. Madrid was informed. Provincial records at the Archivo Histórico de la Marina cite the first sighting at approximately 9:30, logged by a Guardia Civil corporal patrolling the sands south of La Bota. A local trawler hand, often named in secondary sources as José Rey Maria, had spotted the khaki figure face down in shallow surf and notified authorities at the Punta Umbria Carabineros post. The Mi West kept the torso high, while the briefcase, half submerged, knocked rhythmically against the chain. Standard procedure required the civil governor's office to summon the naval delegate and a medical examiner. Dr. Eduardo del Torno arrived before midday and recorded superficial inspection, consistent with drowning after accident de aviación. The body, still clothed, was transported by flatbed lorry to the mortuary at Huelva's San Pablo Hospital. A limited autopsy, thoracic cavity opened, stomach contents sampled, lungs tested for seawater, produced no contradiction. Cause of death was entered as asphyxia by immersion. Time elapsed 7-10 days, a range that matched Allied flight schedules over the Gulf of Cadiz. The dispatch case, logged in the same chain of custody ledger, was retained under seal by Captain Fernando Gómez Rein of the local naval command pending instructions from Madrid. Vice-Consul Francis Haselden received notice through the Guardia Civil at 1400. His initial telegram to the embassy in Madrid, preserved in FO 371-34411, described the deceased as a Royal Marines officer, presumed crash victim, and requested permission for military burial. A second, more carefully coded message to London confirmed that personal effects, including one briefcase of exceptional official appearance, remained with Spanish authorities. Haselden's diary notes show he visited the naval delegate that evening, expressing routine consular interest but refraining from pressing too aggressively, an approach recommended by Section XVII to avoid alarming German observers. Meanwhile, the Abuer chain engaged. Documents declassified from Oberleutnant Klaus's case file reveal a report sent to Madrid at 1800 detailing the find and requesting technical assistance to examine the papers. Within 24 hours, a courier would carry microfilm of the letters north by rail. The delay, critical to the deception, arose from layered Spanish clearances and Klaus's need to duplicate contents without overtly confiscating British property. For the operation's architects, each additional hour the briefcase spent in limbo was measured as a silent victory. A brief post-mortem concluded death by drowning, consistent with an air crash at sea. The toxicology that could have revealed rat poison was not pursued. The British ensured a military burial under the name Major William Martin. Meanwhile, the paperwork traveled into Spanish naval and intelligence channels. The case became an administrative object and a target for the Abuer. At 8:30 on 1 May, Dr. Eduardo del Torno reopened the mortuary slab for formal autopsy in the presence of Captain Fernando Gómez Rein and a civil magistrate. Procedure lasted 47 minutes. Lungs were sectioned and immersed in water, the classic hydrostatic test. They floated, a sign of live inhalation, neatly matching the narrative of an aviator pulled under. No chemical assays were ordered, standard for wartime Spain, where laboratory reagents were scarce and caseload heavy. The stomach, containing only gastric fluid, was recorded and discarded. Autopsy form B17 cites sin lesions traumaticas, meaning no wounds apart from minor bruising attributed to tidal action. With paperwork complete, the remains were released to the British vice-consul for burial. San Marco Cemetery lay 3 kilometers inland, behind a low stone wall and a stand of cypresses. At 9:35 on 2 May, a Spanish military chaplain read Anglican prayers from a translated leaflet, while a 3-man Guardia Civil rifle party fired a ceremonial volley. Hazelden stood with a single Union flag draped over the coffin. Local protocol barred more elaborate honors. The headstone, ordered through a Seville marble mason the same afternoon, would carry the inscription, William Martin, Major, Royal Marines, 1-5 to 43. Consular files note that Hazelden paid burial fees, 240 pesetas, in cash and logged the expense against the Foreign Office Contingency Fund. While the grave was being filled, the briefcase began its own journey. Captain Gomez Reino couriered it by overnight train to the Ministry of Marine in Madrid, arriving 900 on 3 May. There, Naval Attaché Captain Zur C. Carlarich Kulenthal received unofficial sight of the contents. Photographic copies confirm his involvement, before the case passed to the Spanish Foreign Ministry for eventual return. A string of reference numbers multiplied across cover sheets. M34143 at Marine, 27.423G at Foreign, III 148 at the German Embassy. Abwehr Station, Alaric, microfilmed every page on a Zeiss Icon Tessa camera. Frame counter now preserved in Bundesarchiv roll, RW 19146. Intelligence summaries reached Berlin within 72 hours, triggering cables that flagged the Aegean and Sardinia as principal Allied objectives. Thus, in a chain of signatures and stamps, a corpse's paperwork became the lever that shifted Axis reinforcement orders across an entire theater. German intelligence officers in Spain obtained access to the contents. Techniques reportedly included careful steaming and microphotography. British countermeasures, such as minute placement of fibers and recording of fold patterns, later indicated that envelopes had been opened and resealed. Photographs and summaries moved to Berlin. The originals, after a delay, were returned to the British attaché. According to post-war Abwehr depositions preserved in Bjarch file RW 5707, the briefcase reached Kulenthal's desk on the evening of 3 May. Still sealed but already catalogued under Spanish registry number 27.423G. The German naval attaché contacted Oberstleutnant Walter Edel, head of Abwehr Gruppe III on the Iberian Peninsula, who dispatched a document team led by cryptographer Wilhelm Hollanders. They operated after hours in a basement photography lab inside the German embassy on Cal Fortuny, a space outfitted with a steam kettle, a French-made Lumiere plate camera, and a silver nitrate developing sink scavenged from an art studio. The envelopes were softened over a jet of moist air for precisely 14 seconds. Hollanders recorded trial times in a notebook later seized by U.S. counterintelligence. Wax seals lifted clean. The embedded British hair was removed, photographed, and glued back in place with dabs of Spanish Pharmacia adhesive. 2 assistants laid letters flat beneath glass weights while a third snapped sequential exposures. 125S at f8 with a Tessa 105 lens, magnesium ribbon providing floodlight. Each page was captured twice, once full, once detail on signatures, yielding 46 negatives that were dried, cropped, and contact printed on postcard-size stock for the next Luftwaffe courier flight to Berlin. Meanwhile, British quality control tricks waited like tripwires. Ewan Montagu had documented every fold angle, every staple puncture, measuring with 0.5 calipers. When the pouch returned to the British Embassy on 8 May, Foreign Office clerk Ivy Pilgrim examined the fibers under a hand lens. 2 were broken, 3 displaced, enough to confirm tampering. She initialed an MI5 chit that read simply, "Hound has eaten the meat," the prearranged phrase meaning the deception package had been digested. Signals intelligence at Bletchley Park soon provided corroboration. Ultra Intercept CX MSS 1582, dated 10 May, quoted OKW Operations Chief Alfred Jodl querying Army Group E in Athens about readiness for imminent large-scale assault in Peloponnese or Dodecanese. Another intercept the next day referenced Sardinia as a probable secondary object. The linguistic fingerprints of the letters, specific phrases like cover and drench, turned up verbatim in German staff summaries. Diplomatic niceties completed the loop. On 13 May, the Spanish Foreign Ministry formally handed the briefcase to Embassy Naval Attaché Alan Hilgarth with apologies for delay. Seals appeared intact, fold patterns subtly altered. Hilgarth cabled London. Martin's possessions returned. Evident curiosity satisfied. The chain was closed, and in Berlin General Staff charts began to tilt east, exactly as Major William Martin had been scripted to suggest. Bletchley Park watched Axis communications for any reaction. Intercepts began to reflect German interest in Greece and Sardinia at a level matching high command attention. The British team looked for proof in enemy logistics, orders, redeployments, and supply movements. The eyelash test and the wireless traffic told the same story. Inside Hut 6, the first clue arrived as a routine decrypt on 12 May 1943. An Enigma key change broadcast from Oberkommando der Wehrmacht to Army Group E in Salonika, requesting daily readiness reports for coastal artillery south of the Corinth Canal. The message used the operational designator Brimstone, a code name lifted directly from the forged letters. Cryptanalyst Mavis Beatty annotated the sheet with a blue M, her personal tag for material potentially linked to mincemeat, and walked it across the code room floor to Naval Section. There, Commander Deniston added a marginal note. "Fish has bitten, circulate to XX for corroboration." Within 24 hours ultra streams thickened. Luftflotte 2 signaled its Sardinian fighter wings to hold 30% of aircraft at 5-minute readiness. Italian 90th Light Infantry Division in Greece received orders to dig reserve positions facing the Aegean. Railway summaries, decrypted from German Reichsbahn traffic, showed flat cars loaded with 88 flak guns rerouted from Foggia to Kalamata. On a wall map nicknamed the Switchboard, each new logistic move earned a colored pin. By 18 May, red pins across the Peloponnese and blue pins on Sardinia formed an arc of misplaced strength, exactly the vacuum planners wanted around Sicily. The double-cross committee supplied parallel confirmation. Agent Bronx, a turned Abueir courier in Lisbon, reported his handlers were extremely satisfied with new intelligence proving Allied preparations against the Balkans. In London, that note was matched to intercept CX MSS 1599, wherein Abueir Chief Wilhelm Canaris assured OKW that recently acquired correspondence from senior British staff aligned perfectly with earlier agent reports. The circular validation trap had snapped shut. Forged letters, German pride, and double-agent whispers all echoed the same false melody. Still, Bletchley analysts looked for kinetic proof, fuel consumption. Enigma decrypts of Luftwaffe quartermaster signals logged 225 tons of aviation spirit, delivered to Crete between 20 and 25 May, a 60% jump over April baselines. Such bulk could not be faked. Station X concluded the deception was not only believed, but acting on German fuel and rail stock, the hardest currency of war. Mid-May 1943 orders from the German High Command directed reinforcements and increased readiness in Greece and the Aegean, with additional attention to Sardinia. Contemporary war diaries show the Aegean flagged as a principal danger area. Units and aircraft earmarked for Sicily were constrained by these decisions. The center of gravity shifted eastward. The pivotal directive carried the heading Chef WFSD NR. 56,412-43 GK DOS, and is dated 15 May. Signed by Generaloberst Alfred Jodl. It instructed Army Group E to prepare for an Allied descent upon the Peloponnesus or the Dodecanese chain within 6 weeks. The same message ordered Luftflotte 2 to detach IIIZG-1, equipped with Bf-110s, from Sicily's Catania airfields to the bases at Heraklion and Rhodes Maritza, reducing Sicily's long-range fighter screen by 12 serviceable aircraft and 75 trained ground crew. Panzergrenadier Regiment 190, previously held in Calabria for rapid transfer across the Strait of Messina, received movement orders to Larissa by Italian Rail Route IX. The journey consumed 600 flat cars that would otherwise have shuttled artillery toward Caltanissetta. Logistics diaries reveal the cost. Quartermaster General Eduard Wagner's office recorded a sudden allocation of 2,400 tons of engineer stores, timber, barbed wire, prefabricated pillboxes, loaded in Ploesti, and shipped by Danube barge to Salonika between 18 and 27 May. Kriegsmarine logs note 4 Siebel ferries reassigned from Palermo Harbor Defense to the Gulf of Volas to bolster Aegean coastal patrols. Even Hitler's personal reserve, the Fallskirmjäger Sturm Regiment, was warned for possible deployment to the Dodecanese, although the move never materialized. Italian files mirror the shift. Comando Supremo's Situation Report number 418, intercepted and translated at Bletchley, details Mussolini's agreement to station the 184th Paratroop Division, Nembo, in western Greece under German operational control. Sardinia, meanwhile, received Flak Regiment 135 and 2 squadrons of Region Ray .2002 fighter bombers redirected from Lex. Those aircraft consumed priority shipments of 100-octane fuel that Sicilian bases had already requisitioned for July. By 25 May, the misallocation was visible on the map boards inside OKW's Lagezimmer. Red flags crowded the Aegean, while the Sicilian sector retained its standing units but gained little depth. Field Marshal Kesselring's diary entry for 26 May notes frustration that requests for additional coastal artillery at Gela and Licata were postponed pending Balkan requirements. No record suggests he realized those requirements emerged from a briefcase found on a Spanish beach. Measured in rail kilometers and fuel drums, the eastward pull was decisive. Assets that might have contested Allied convoys in the Straits of Sicily were now digging gun pits along the Gulf of Corinth or revetting airstrips on Rhodes. The deception had migrated from paper to movement orders, from hypothesis to steel and petrol, a redistribution that would echo across the beaches of Syracuse 8 weeks later. On 9-10 July 1943, Allied convoys approached Sicily. Initial Axis responses were shaped by prior assumptions. Reserves and air assets in the eastern Mediterranean were not positioned for rapid employment over Sicily. German and Italian commands recalibrated only after landings proved the main effort. Critical days had already been spent. Convoy routes converged in darkness from 3 directions. Task Force 85 out of Iran threading the Tunis-Sicily gap, Admiral Hewitt's W Task Force clearing Malta's Narrows, and a Royal Navy covering group sweeping north of Pantelleria. Radar plots from the cruiser USS Boise record Sea State 4, wind southwest at 18 knots, barometer falling, conditions that drove surf onto Sicily's southeastern beaches hard enough to swamp many landing craft at H-hour plus 30. Yet the weather that punished Allied infantry also helped mask the armada from Luftwaffe night flyers, whose Sicilian fields had been thinned of radar operators sent east weeks earlier. Axis command filters dulled the alarms. Fliegerkorps X at Taormina received fragmented reports of 30-40 vessels south of Malta at 2200 on the 9th, but had standing orders to conserve fuel for Aegean contingencies. An earlier directive, born of Mincemeat's papers, still ranked Greece as primary threat until incontrovertible proof said otherwise. Thus reconnaissance Ju-88s launched toward the Ionian rather than the Straits of Sicily. Coastal watch posts at Gela, seeing silhouettes at 200, telephone 6. Army headquarters in Enna, which relayed up to Ab Sud. The request for immediate bomber support met the reply, assets currently redeploying from Maritza to Catania, ETA unclear. On the ground, Italian XVI Corps fielded 207 operational artillery pieces but lacked mobile reserves. The veteran German 90. Panzergrenadier, flagged months earlier for emergency use on Sicily's western flank, was unloading in Patras when the first Rangers cut wire on Gela Pier. Railway manifests show its armor still on Greek flat cars 48 hours after initial landings. Fallskirmjäger elements earmarked for counteroffensive parachute drops remained on standby in Athens. Kesselring's urgent signal at 700 on 10 July could not conjure transport aircraft already servicing road supply hops. By dusk on D+1, Allied beachheads stretched from Licata to Capo Muro di Porco. Luftwaffe raids arrived piecemeal. Stuka groups from Cagliari, fighter-bombers rerouted via Naples, their staging complicated by fuel allocations promised to Sardinia. Historian counts list 39 Axis sorties against the beaches in the first 18 hours, barely a quarter of planning estimates. Those missing aircraft, men, and tanks were busy fortifying positions 600 kilometers east, the last echoes of a Welshman's forged identity dictating where German commanders expected the hammer to fall. Archives record troop and aircraft movements toward Greece through June and early July, including armored formations and anti-aircraft units. Signals show increased mining and coastal defense works in the Aegean. Even partial diversions reduced Axis flexibility for Sicily's defense. The calculus of deception is read in timetables more than headlines. Deutsche Reichsbahn Freight Ledger D30-143 lists 7842 flatcar equivalents loaded for Balkan destinations between 1 June and 8 July, an 82% surge over April. Tank battalions of 1. Panzer Division traveled in 5 echelons, 34 PZ KPFW III OSF in hulls, 22 SDKFZ, 251 half-tracks, and 96 trucks carrying ammunition and bridging gear. The shipping order shows a departure from Foggia on 14 June, locomotive class 290 hauling at an average 38 km/h, arrival Thessaloniki 6 days later. Those rail paths would otherwise have fed into the Sicilian railhead at Villa San Giovanni, whose own intake fell by nearly a third during the same window. Luftwaffe quartermaster returns complement the picture. Air Station Strength Report NR 235 tallies 74 aircraft transferred from Sicily's Grup X to the 27th Flying Corps in Crete, 28 Ju-88 bombers, 12 Bf-110 heavy fighters, 3 transport Ju-52 squadrons, and the field workshop trucks to keep them serviceable. Each move required 56,000 liters of aviation spirit, siphoned from depots at Bari and Brindisi. Sicilian bases filed requisitions for replacement fuel that never arrived. By Allied landing day, Catania Fontanarossa held only 3 days aviation reserve instead of the planned 7. Engineering stores tell the same story in concrete and wire. Aegean Coastal reports captured after the war reference 1,200 prefabricated tetrahedral obstacles offloaded at Piraeus and shipped to Nauplia. German Navy minesweeper flotillas laid 2,400 additional EMC mines in the Kythera Channel, consuming 450 tons of high explosive and diverting hulls that could have patrolled the Straits of Messina. Ultra-decrypt KP MSS 1624, dated 28 June, notes a request from Admiral Aegean to Oberkommando seeking more sweepers. The reply promised none, citing priority already granted. Axis flexibility shrank by arithmetic. Each freight train locked onto the Danube line, each bomber wing committed to Crete, subtracted reaction hours from Sicily. When Allied planners later assessed Husky's casualty tables, they traced a portion of lives saved not to beachhead tactics but to the 7842 railcars, 74 aircraft, and hundreds of tons of steel that were persuaded, by a dead man's briefcase, to face the wrong horizon. The grave in Nostra Senora Cemetery bears the identity Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Decades later, official records acknowledged the man beneath the alias as Glyndwr Michael, and the inscription was amended accordingly. The grave remains a physical point of contact with the operation. The story it marks stayed classified for years. Cemetery registers show Plot 14, Row 3, Grave 12 purchased by the British Consulate on 2 May 1943 for 240 pesetas, a modest sum folded into Foreign Office Cable No. 7484 under the bland line, Repatriation Impracticable. A white-painted wooden cross went up first, lacquer already peeling in the Andalusian heat by midsummer. In late 1949, the Imperial War Graves Commission replaced the marker with a Portland stone slab, Latin cross in low relief, service crest of the Royal Marines, and the chiseled legend William Martin, a man who faithfully served his king 1907 to 1943. No date of birth appeared. Matching the deception, Martin's life prior to commission was left indefinite. For 2 decades the grave drew only occasional diplomatic wreaths, a red-rimmed ensign on Armistice Day, a single rose from the vice-consul's clerks. Locals knew the plot more for its tidiness than for any storied past. Classified files at the Public Record Office held the truth. Home Office File Ho 186-783 included the coroner's certificate for Glyndwr Michael, sealed until 1974 under the 30-year rule. When the seal lifted, journalist Ian Colvin traced the numeric code to the wartime coroner's ledger and published the link in the Daily Telegraph of 21 September 1977, the first public naming of the man who had never worn the uniform carved above him. Officials neither confirmed nor denied but quietly allowed the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to draft an addendum. On 4 February 1998, under a thin winter sun, a stonemason set a smaller plaque flush with the earth at the foot of the original headstone. Glyndwr Michael served as William Martin, whose brave deception saved many lives. No ceremony attended the installation. Embassy staff signed the work order, the mason photographed the completed stone, and the file closed. Visitors now see both identities in one sightline, fabrication and flesh, still separated by a hyphen. The grave gathers mixed offerings. Red Welsh dragon flags left by tourists from Carmarthenshire, miniature Royal Marines cap badges pinned to the soil by veterans, a plastic poppy faded to pink. It anchors a story once buried beneath double-locked filing cabinets, now taught in staff college lectures about the moral geometry of war. The body that moved armies lies less than a meter below, the stone above reminding onlookers that names, like orders, can be provisional until history decides otherwise. After the war, Ewan Montagu published an account titled The Man Who Never Was, and a film followed. Some details were altered or withheld. Later historians and declassified files filled gaps. The broad contours proved accurate, though specific attributions in Spain and Berlin remain debated. The operations core remains firmly documented. Montagu's 1953 book emerged under Admiralty clearance that still masked Ultra, Spain's factional intrigues, and the real name of the corpse. He framed the narrative as an almost whimsical caper, emphasizing cleverness over bureaucracy and describing Spanish cooperation as cordial rather than ambivalent. Naval Intelligence Reader's Notes, now in ADM 121345, show multiple redacted lines. Any reference to Bletchley Park, any hint that double-cross agents amplified the find, and every operational code word except mincemeat. Even so, the memoir revealed enough for security veterans to worry. MI5 head Sir Percy Silito wrote in a private minute that discretion's edge grows thin when publishers beckon. 2 years later, Alexander Korda produced the film adaptation. Shooting on location in London and Gibraltar, the production consulted Montagu but invented composite Spaniards, simplified the Abuer chain, and staged a fictional duel of wits between a suave German agent and a pipe-smoking British officer. The corpse became a somber but sanitized prop. The ethics of using Glyndwr Michael's body were never raised on screen. Yet the picture's reach proved strategic. NATO psychological warfare handbooks from the 1960s cite the man who never was as an example of public diplomacy reinforcing deterrence, showing potential adversaries that British intelligence could still conjure intricate deceptions. Academic scrutiny tightened after the Public Records Act releases of the 1970s and 1990s. Historian Roger Morgan's article in the Journal of Strategic Studies, 1972, cross-referenced Spanish naval archives to reveal Kuhlenthal's microphotography work. Hugh Trevor Roper later tracked marginalia in OKW files that matched phrases from Nye's forged letter. Debate lingers around one Madrid official, rumored to have leaked the documents intentionally to curry Allied favor, because his interrogation transcript remains partially closed under Spanish privacy law. What survives uncontested is the operational ledger. German Order 56,412-43, Greek rail manifests, Luftwaffe fuel tallies, numbers that do not depend on memoir or movie. Every reinforcement mile that turned east instead of crossing the Strait of Messina is a footnote carved in steel rails and aviation drums. The man who never was, and the deception he carried, thus straddles two histories: the popular tale told in cinemas and the quieter arithmetic written in tonnage, train paths, and graves avoided on Sicilian sand. Using a human body as a weapon of deception raised questions then and now. British files show internal concern about consent and dignity, while operational necessity carried the day. The effect on enemy deployments is measurable. The moral ledger is discussed in archives, classrooms, and memorials. Mincemeat sits at the intersection of craft, consequence, and conscience. Cabinet Office File Cab 154-121 contains the only surviving minute that addresses the moral dimension before approval. Dated 26 March 1943, it summarizes a brief exchange between Deputy Prime Minister Clement Attlee and First Sea Lord Sir Dudley Pound. Attlee asked whether the deceased had willingly served the Crown. Pound's reply, equally terse, argued that by saving many lives the act confers honor rather than indignity. No vote was taken. The operation proceeded. That single sheet is now reproduced in ethics textbooks as evidence of how quickly life-and-death decisions were framed during total war. Medical voices hesitated. Sir Bentley Purchase required a written guarantee that the body would receive a Christian burial and post-war, a marked grave. Pathologist Bernard Spilsbury, while confirming forensic suitability, wrote privately that the boundary between utility and desecration is thin and easily crossed. His letter, discovered in 2004 among family papers, reveals a civilian anxiety largely absent from military memoranda. Yet neither man blocked the plan. Wartime Britain, enduring 1943's U-boat losses and bomber casualties, judged outcomes on aggregate arithmetic. Thousands potentially spared outweighed one man already dead. Modern legal scholars debate whether Glyndwr Michael could be said to have consented. Under 21st century UK law, a deceased person's remains carry quasi-property status, and next of kin typically control disposition. In 1943, the coroner's court held practical authority when no family stepped forward. The line between lawful custody and ethical approval therefore blurred into administrative convenience. Critics argue that a state fighting for liberal values compromised them. Defenders note that the same state later acknowledged Michael by name, maintained his grave, and declassified the truth. Strategists see a cautionary tale. Operation Mincemeat is cited alongside more recent debates on targeted misinformation and psychological operations. Military academies dissect its utilitarian logic: minimal physical harm, maximal operational gain. Bioethicists, however, ask whether instrumentalizing a body erodes the very standards armies claim to defend. The discussion remains unresolved, echoing through lecture halls and wreath-laying ceremonies in Huelva. What is clear is that the corpse which drifted ashore did more than mislead a foe. It forced allies and adversaries alike to confront how far they would go and where they might stop when truth itself becomes a weapon.